This ending got me to openly cry. Twice. One of Elite Orchard's biggest criticisms in storytelling is that you can focus too much on world building and end-of-the-world scenarios and forget that people care more about people. It doesn't matter if the Earth is going to blow up if we don't care about the actual handful of people or even the culture and society that everything takes place in. Overly Sarcastic Studios also hit up on this. So that kind of critical thinking that I enjoy diving into and at least consuming, if not being very good at discussing it myself, resonates with me, especially in superhero films. I will lean in that DC usually has more heavier topics and philosophies at the core of their stories, but I'm never really interested in that. But I'll always be more interested in the personal struggles, fears, and trauma of the Marvel cast, because even during world-shaking events, the story of Steve trying to save his friend Bucky was more fulfilling than the overall plot of Hydra running S.H.I.E.L.D. Hell, in the same movie, whether or not Nick Fury was going to die and how he was going to get control of everything again after sacrificing so much was more interesting than S.H.I.E.L.D. being run by Nazis. Yes, the movies are cheesy, formulaic, sometimes a little samey, or really samey. But still, I eat it up because I like seeing characters I find charming go through rough times and then go through some personal growth that either saves the day or saves the world. That same charm is something that I feel breeds in Final Fantasy XIV. Yeah, it's dumb that the Sultan Sworn are so incompetent that the crown is so easily stolen, but during the Paladin quests and main story, we get to see that this is a known problem, and we get to see the Sultana and a lot of her followers and friends grow as better leaders and take more responsibility for the things that they're frankly not very good at. In the Heavens Ward plot, it's about trying to end the racism between the dragons and the Ashgardians, where the conflict has gotten so bad that they actually have a goddamn religion devoted and run by people who want to kill dragons. Meanwhile, the player is a traitor of Ul'dah and a heretic to the Ashgardians, and yet the only thing I'm caring about is my boy Rauban. His best friend betrayed him for a cause in a fight they both agree needs to be done, but they can't agree on how it's supposed to be done. So treachery has to happen, but even then the treachery is kind of understandable because shit doesn't happen. And on top of all that, it's still a story about family, honor, morals, sacrifice, and a willingness to accept when you are wrong and you have to do something to change. Stormblood is a little less dramatic, but kind of more entertaining in some ways. There's that civil revolution was just raging on about going on, which would potentially eradicate an entire series of cultures. Meanwhile, I'm really just caring about the overall individualized concept of survival and self-discovery with these characters. They are the catalyst to most of the things that happen in the plot and are the representation of what the cultures are going through. And even then, the story outright shows the different perspectives to where, God, how many other people are going through this? Shadowbringers, we finally come to a head. The Ascians reveal that they are the complete remnant of a society split asunder due to a struggling political and moral ideal, seeing the only way to return what was lost to them due to a power and force they could not hope to control, only stall. And they are the biggest threat to not just the world, but many. And yet, as Emmett Selk fades after being turned into a destructive primal of darkness,
remember us. Remember that we once lived.
no side being really no more right than the other than that the Ascians want their home back. But to do it, they have to kill. And we don't want to die. The Ascians just want to be free to live like us. However, they believe that we are corrupted, that we're not the ideal versions of our old selves, of a world that once was, that can come back. Senses of honor, promises unfilled, and the needs of so many, versus a whole other group of people who, well, as humans tend to do, get justified in not being human enough. And that's the most disgustingly human thing. We are to the Ascians what AI is to us now. Plenty of stories have looked into how the world sees evolving AI and whether or not it's a comparable to humanity, and the Ascians really just see us as puzzle pieces, not fully put together, that us dying doesn't matter because we'll be reborn literally back into our old, more perfect selves. We are pieces to something bigger. And yet, it's just as human that we don't want to be a part of that. We know our lives, we have our lives, and we've fought for them just as hard as the Ascians have. Which is also entertaining when you think that the Ascians have been lurking in the shadows as like over-the-top cartoon villains for the better part of 10 years almost. And yet now, we see them as something much more. Real antagonists. People who aren't just speaking platitudes, but have legitimate goals and lofty reasons of wanting to just wipe the slate clean. And Elidibus, for all the times I was honestly thinking he was just gonna be a fault line, the final Ascian, someone who's been ever present in the machinations and schemes of some of the biggest major conflicts, he's weirdly the most human because he's a primal. He's a manifestation given physical form, an idea, a mission given a body, a mirror of a man who once was. We've been breaking down how human primals really are, and we see one hurting, struggling, raging, and yet hopeful of the power he wields and the righteous cause he fights for. We became from warriors of light to darkness to fend off an overabundance of something we've been fighting with, only to see our reflection tossed back at us as the reflection is tossed back at Elidibus, at Emmett Selk, at the Garleans, at the Ishgardians. All of this is going on with end-of-the-world repercussions, but when you really just break it down, even with the most cartoony villain, it's about personal desires, personal needs and wants, and whether or not those things matter more than others.
Stay strong. Keep the faith. At duty's end, we will meet again. We will. We will. The rains have ceased, and we have been graced with another beautiful day. But you are not here to see it.
I mean, it's righteous to say that everyone's needs and goals matter, but it's human to debate where that line has to get drawn, and we don't always have that. Now, for those of you who just got curious about the story of FF14 and where it's gone thus far, I'll admit I'm reading a lot between the lines, and I am drunk on how much I love this game and this story, so take into account that this story is told with bad English accents even when they're Asian. Pretentious in presentation, making a spectacle out of everything when 5 words could suffice enough. FF14 gets praised for its story, which I feel is far better when consumed in a straight line with only the usual casual breaks when you're not playing, rather than the weeks or months between every patch, but even then, it just feels like a whole new season coming back. And the story is praised because it's not a conventional MMO story. It's really just a JRPG, a Final Fantasy story being told while role-playing as an MMO. To end this video off, I want to use the stories that we've been told and that we've been discussing here today for some real-world application. Nothing exists in a bubble. The FF community, including myself, very much myself, we're very hesitant, and some, I would say, still are hesitant to even let criticism be said within its own community about the game. Let's face it, guys. FF14 is not a perfect game, and it's not a perfect story. Plenty of classes have some weird things about how they play that need some major tweaking, not just to be functional, but to feel better to play in general. The Mog Station shop, while it is by no means a pay-to-win, has some poorly aged Square Enix business tactics, and I kind of want to make a separate video breaking down my distaste. I can't say that I'm an MMO fan because Final Fantasy XIV is the first MMO I've really sunk some teeth into, and as you can tell, it's not because it's an MMO, it's because it's a multiplayer Final Fantasy game. But that doesn't mean that the history of MMOs isn't something that people freak out about, or isn't not what we freak out about. Plenty of great games and great titles have gone the wayside, because they were trying to copy the king of MMOs at the time, or they weren't trying enough of copying. Final Fantasy's got this really nice in-between to where there's enough about it that's different, but also enough to where somebody who might have played World of Warcraft, or even any tab-targeting MMO, can pick it up and kind of get the feel for it. So it's always been an easy target to go into and have a lot of people criticize it for fair reasons. Often, we read those criticisms and it doesn't come out very polite. And often back, we're just as toxic and bile. We are the Asians, reacting and trying to keep what we know that makes us happy, our Final Fantasy safe. But we don't have to do that anymore. The game is popular enough on its own, it's earned its own merits and why it's still stuck around, and at this point, people are just clamoring now more for an MMO like the old days because the market doesn't really cater to that anymore. And I bring this up because it's so easy to let something like a subjective opinion or even sometimes an objective view on shitty business practices feel like a personal attack, especially on a game where, again, this is your second life almost. But it's your second life. It's not your real one. And a lot more important things are worth using your energy for to do a lot more important things. So let's keep Final Fantasy our Final Fantasy, our haven to have fun, beat some challenges, and yeah, bitch and moan so that the game gets better. And if people are rude to you about you liking this game, don't be rude back. And if someone is giving a genuine criticism, just take a breath and hear them out. You might be able to learn something or even start asking for something that Yoshi and the team would actually implement. They've done it before. Find happiness where you can get it, and then when you're done detoxing and recovering, get up and be a real hero. With that very chipper lesson learned, follow me on Twitter and Twitch, links down below, and join my Discord if you want to hang out and join me for some different pug runs of the high-end content, or you want to go into the comments below and tell me about what Final Fantasy XIV has taught you in its story and gameplay, and some of the criticisms and changes you yourself like to see. My name is Basil, not the Herb, and I'm asking you to think tasty.